Welcome to the lighting episode of this 5-part series where I talk you guys through the ins and outs of my live streaming home studio. In my overview video, I briefly explained the methods and lights that I use to get my desired look. But in this video, I'm going to dig deeper into the lights I'm using and the placement and all the techniques that I use personally. So let's get started. And the first thing I wanted to mention really is that remember that you can have the most kick-ass camera in the world, but if you don't have a worthwhile lighting setup, then you're not making the most of what your camera can actually do. First of all, you got to understand that lighting yourself and your surroundings properly is going to just give your camera more data to feed into the color grading software or the broadcasting software that you're using to stream. That's essentially what it bears down to, is more data for the camera, more light into the sensor. When it's too dark in a room, or if the subject is too unevenly lit, maybe there's like a shadow. For example, you can see when I turn my fill light off for a second, you can really see the difference. I have a shadow on this side of my face and the image is just totally faulted. It's not as sharp and clear and bright as it could be. There we go, that's better. Whereas this is a little bit more better. You can see this side of my face, right? I talk very briefly about the 3-point lighting method that is very commonly used in photography studios, any kind of studio setting environment. 3-point lighting is used pretty much across the board, and it's the same with my setup here for my live streams. So if you haven't seen that in our overview video, go check that out. I explain there what the positioning of every single light means and how important each one is. The next thing you need to try and understand is that with white light, you want to use that to light up you, the subject. Try not to do this with colored light. It's not going to give you very nice results. White light is exactly what you need. Colored light, you want to use more for embellishments, for different scenarios, for example, for your background, like we have here. You want to use your colored light to embellish different elements in the room or the background and create a mood, create a vibe, right? Something to remember with white light and when you're lighting up the subject or you, the broadcaster, in front of the camera is that if you don't have enough white light, then you're gonna probably get a lot of camera noise, depending on the quality of your camera as well and how high you have your ISO set. The easiest way to remember this is less light into the camera lens means more noise. Let's briefly talk about light temperature, because this is really important. With light temperature, it's really important to keep every light that you're using for your white light consistent. Don't mix and match. For example, maybe you're in a situation where you have a window in your room and it's typically open during the day and you want to keep that open while you're streaming, then you're going to want to use LEDs that match daylight temperature, which I believe is 6000 K. Using like mismatched color temperatures with your lights is going to give you a very odd look, especially if it's light that's being thrown onto the subject. So keep consistent with your light temperature across all the lights that you're using, particularly if you happen to be using different brands. Just ensure that the temperature Kelvin is set at the correct value. For me, I stream in the day and the night. I do have a window in this room, but it is being blacked out by a blackout blind. So that gives me more control in the room itself. Everything is being lit up with the LEDs alone. If you are using analog lights, ensure that you're using digital ballast. That's something to bear in mind as well. For those of you that may have been watching me for years, about 6 years ago, when I first started live streaming, I was actually using halogens at one point, and very frequently midstream, bulbs would explode. It was very, very hot in the studio I was using back then and just wasn't the best solution. Don't use halogens. That's obvious, but don't use halogens. Another worthwhile tip we covered in our overview video is to use LEDs where you can incrementally dial up and down the brightness or intensity of your LED lights. Some LED panels also come with the capability of changing the color temperature on the light itself. Others come with almost like slides that you can slide in front of the panels, such as maybe you want a tungsten temperature, a warmer temperature for what you're trying to achieve. So there's different solutions with different panels that are available. So put in some research. I've left some handy examples in the description below. I'm consistently changing from light to dark mode inside of apps I use like Twitter, depending on the time of day. And it gave me the idea to maybe change things up in the studio in a physical sense as well when it comes to lighting. So I have my own light mode and my own dark mode for the jungle. This is really fun to play around with, especially when I'm performing in here all the time and I want to switch up the vibe instantly, and I don't know, maybe make things more moody and emotive for, I guess, darker songs I'm performing, or maybe I just want to sit and chill and chat with the audience, and sometimes a darker kind of vibe up in here calls for that. Because the lighting for these two different scenes is significantly different and everything is set to a relay switch and is hooked up to my Stream Deck, the color grading for each of those two scenes is drastically different. So that is something that is all pre-programmed and all changes dependent on what scene is open inside of OBS. Lighting plays a huge role in that kind of two switcher mode of dark mode to light mode. Let's talk about the software that I'm using to control all of the LED colored lights inside of my room. Hopefully you guys will find this helpful, especially if you're looking for an interface that's fluid and easy to use if you've already got LEDs that you want to control in your existing space. So this is the software. This is the Q Light controller. This enables me to create my own interface depending on what lights I already have. So I can interact with this interface, these panels that I've pre-programmed manually, or via MIDI, which is what I do using my Stream Deck. I have all my pre-programmed light scenes set up so I can instantly change colors to whatever it is that I want. As I'm changing the colors on my Stream Deck right now, you can see that everything is being triggered inside of the software itself. I can tell the Q Light controller what lighting fixtures I already have, and from there it can tell me exactly what I'm able to do inside of the software with that particular fixture. So even though the lights are DMX'd in a series, I can control each light independently, create fades, chases, and just really unique scenes to throw some dramatic color profiles onto the jungle backdrop. These lights are all chained on something called DMX, and DMX is the common digital communication used for stage lighting control. So if I switch back to my virtual console here, you can see that, you know, some modes kind of exude a darker kind of neon vibe. Others kind of light up the back a little bit. I just have a simple blackout scene, so at the end of the day, it's really easy to turn every light off. I'm not having to manually go around on every light and switch them off. All of these lights that you see in my backdrop here, they were all used at one point or another on stage in different bands that I've been in over the years. They were, as I say, collecting dust, and you know, I thought working them into the space would be a cool thing to do. Hence why I have them. Although a lot of these fixtures that I have in this room are actually discontinued, that they are that old. I've had these lights for some of them over 8 years. I've left some links in the description to some more up-to-date ones that are available, that are affordable, and are worthwhile options to look into. The software itself is really intuitive, really easy to use. I've used this to program my own lights for actual live shows for venues before, so we can rock up with our own kind of lighting session and we're ready to go dependent on what fixtures venues use. This software is actually open source, meaning it's free to use, but I'd always encourage where you can to donate to the developers. When you go to download this particular software or any open source software, there is usually a donate button, so make sure that you support the devs. Something I get asked quite a lot is whether or not my backdrop is a green screen, which is an understandable and logical question to ask, right? So one of the ways that you can kind of debunk that initial assumption for new viewers coming through, if you're looking at setting up something more physical like this and you're not going the green screen route, which works fine as well, by the way. Number one, a roaming camera like this helps to give that kind of depth of field, I guess, something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to pull off, I don't think, with a green screen in a realistic way anyway. Another thing is a hair light can help hugely in terms of making you, the subject, stand out from the background. So, for example, my hair light is fixed to the roof just above and behind me. This helps kind of emphasize the kind of silhouette and makes the subject kind of pop a little bit more from the backdrop. It's something we briefly touched on in the 3-point lighting system in the overview video, so if you haven't checked that out, go watch that. It's worth noting that some lights can introduce flicker to your camera image. This usually comes down to the shutter speed on the camera itself, but sometimes it's the lights that you're using. If you are experiencing flickering lights, when you're setting up for your streams, I would encourage that you play around with your camera settings until you get the desired look that you're after. Usually it's down to the shutter speed of the camera itself. It's amazing what you can achieve with good lighting, and you don't necessarily need the best LEDs or white lights in the world to get the desired look you're after. The best thing to do is experiment and see what works for you, especially with your colored lights. The size of your room and how much white light you're using in that space is all going to contribute to your final look. So it's definitely worth researching and looking into lighting in the early stages of creating your live streaming space. If you want to talk lighting a little more with me, then let's do it. Let's talk things through. Head on over to Patreon, where I'm hosting monthly one-on-one sessions with you guys, talking all things live streaming. I want to help in the best way I can. So if there's any burning questions, or perhaps you've been met with your own set of weird and wonderful problems that you've come across technically, let's sit down, talk things through, and get you guys sorted. Make sure you jump into our room design episode next, and if you haven't already, check out the visual or audio episodes in the series, and also ensure that you check out the overview. Remember, you guys can take part in the conversation that's happening over on my Discord in a dedicated streaming setup channel. There's a link for that in the description below, so make sure you join up. You can find me across socials, but make sure you come through my live streams, more importantly, on YouNow and Twitch. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments below. I want that to be an active conversation down there also. And happy streaming!